Mark your calendars for our annual baptism event, Dunk and Dine, which will take place on Sunday, August 24th at 1 p.m. out at Clarks Bay. We are thrilled to be able to celebrate baptism with those getting baptized, their family and friends, and as a Narrate community. We're going to do pulled pork again, which is always amazing. Please bring along a side, dessert, or beverage to share. We look forward to celebrating baptisms with you all in August. Thanks.
The parable of the Good Samaritan. An expert in the law stood up to test Jesus. "Teacher," he said, "what must I do to inherit eternal life?" He said to him, "What is written in the law? What do you read there?" He answered, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself." And he said to him, "You have given the right answer. Do this, and you will live." But wanting to vindicate himself, he asked Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" Jesus replied, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho and fell into the hands of robbers, who stripped him, beat him, and took off, leaving him half dead. Now by chance a priest was going down that road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. So likewise a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, while traveling, came upon him, and when he saw him, he was moved with compassion. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, treating them with oil and wine, and then he put him on his own animal, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii, gave them to the innkeeper, and said, 'Take care of him, and when I come back, I will repay you whatever more you spend.' Which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of the robbers?" He said, "The one who showed him mercy." Jesus said to him, "Go and do likewise."
Thanks, Jenny. Good morning. It's nice to be back in a rhythm with y'all. I hope you had a great weekend off last weekend. I don't know where you fall on the scale of love fireworks or hate fireworks. I'm kind of somewhere in the middle. It doesn't really bring me joy to light my money on fire and shoot it into the sky. But it brings a lot of my neighbors quite a bit of joy. So we just get to secondhand experience everything, except for this 4th of July. It was nuts where I live. And at one point we heard something hit our house. And so we're well, we should probably figure that out. And in our front yard, there was this rocket that didn't just float to our lawn. It torpedoed into our lawn. And after that, we were inside is nice. And I think we were asleep by 9:30. So I hope you had a great 4th. And it was safe and fun, and your fireworks went up straight and didn't hit other people's houses. But we've got a really fun story that we get to go through this morning, the parable of the Good Samaritan. And if you're like me, I guess I've always thought of this parable as a really straightforward moral lesson. If you see someone on the side of the road, literally or figuratively, they're in the ditch, help them. Even if they don't look like you or dress like you or sound like you, we're called to help them and be good neighbors. That's just kind of how I always thought of this story. And so I thought, man, when I got asked to speak on this, I was well, this is going to be a 2-minute message and we're going to be to lunch by 11:30. This is great. But if you know Jesus or you've been reading the text at all, there's always more we can learn. There's always more things that we can challenge, go deeper. And so I hope this morning, I hope to be able to provide just maybe a different angle on what could be a familiar story. And if it's not, great, I'm glad you're here. So our question for this morning, just to frame our thoughts for the next 20 minutes or so, is what if this and other parables are anything but straightforward and simple? This morning I've got 3 questions that I want to ask about parables in general, and then we're going to use the parable of the Good Samaritan to kind of start to think about those questions critically. But first we should probably get on the same page, what is a parable? So parables are found not just in the New Testament or the Gospels, but they're found throughout the text. And they're little explainer stories that are attempting to explain what's going on. I think they're meant to be memorable and sticky because they're narratives, they're stories about characters. And there's something about reading a story about people where we either kind of lean in and identify with the people in the story, or we kind of lean out and go, ugh, I don't want to identify with someone like that. So question number 1 for this morning. What if parables don't cut to the chase? What if parables aren't straightforward? What if they're not a form of direct communication, but rather a form of indirect communication? I like the Bible Project. They put it that parables are subversive critiques designed to shift our framework of reality. That's a good reference. If you need, they have like 10 hours of parable content I put on your mind map. If you need some more parable talk after this morning. But this long quote is going to go into, we're going to go into like direct communication, indirect communication. This is a long quote, but we're going to kind of break it down. So direct communication, it's important for conveying information, right? It's direct, one person to another, it's efficient. But learning is more than information intake, especially if the learner is someone who thinks they already understand. Like, I'm someone, I think I understand a lot about hiking. I kind of know what I need. I kind of know where I want to go. I know how to, like, watch the weather, right? But I could read or study a hike I want to do and not know anything about it until I've, like, put my boots on and packed my bag and gone out and experienced that hike. We know that learning is so much more than just kind of sitting and passively taking in information. So people entrenched in their current understanding set their defenses against direct communication, and they end up conforming the message into the channels of their current understanding of reality. Next time one of your friends posts something like hot topic-y on Facebook, just look at the comment section. This is a perfect example of just direct communication, and no one's changing their opinion. We're all just conforming the message into our idea of reality. We're entrenched in our current understandings. So I have kind of an entrenched understanding. I'm very entrenched in this belief. And this belief is that The Office, the TV show The Office, anyone? Thank you, Cameron. Yes. I am a firm believer that this show is the best show ever and it's relevant to most situations in life. Thank you. So, if you're not an Office fan, I'm so sorry. I'll try to explain it quickly, but if you need a bathroom break, great time too. So in season 5 of The Office, Michael Scott, he is the boss of Dunder Mifflin Paper Company, and he has some problems with corporate, and so he quits. And he takes Pam and Ryan, 2 other employees, and he starts the Michael Scott Paper Company. And his motto, his business plan is, if our prices are lower, we will always win. And so Pam kind of comes in, she's the voice of reason in most episodes, and she is telling him very directly, this is not going to work. Like, we have overhead costs, the long-term fundability or whatever, this is not going to work, right? For all these reasons, we need to hire more people, we need a space, and he is determined to focus on this like short-term plan of, if our prices are lower, we will win, right? And so it takes like bankruptcy and a buyout opportunity for him to finally come around to this idea that maybe that's not a great business motto. I think we're talking about direct communication, like we'll get a little bit nerdy psychology here. We have to talk about cognitive dissonance. And cognitive dissonance is this tension or discomfort that we feel when we hold 2 or more conflicting beliefs and attitudes, or maybe our belief is in conflict with our actions. And as people, we don't like that comfort or that discomfort, we don't like that tension, and so we're motivated to reduce that tension. And often it's easier to kind of justify it to ourselves than actually change like an attitude or a behavior. So that's direct communication. Let's think about indirect communication. It's a little bit more subtle, it's a bit more nuanced, we're paying attention to more context clues. Indirect communication finds a way in through the back window to confront a person's view of reality. A parable's ultimate aim is to draw in the listener, to awaken insight, to stimulate the conscience, and to move to action. Jesus' parables are prophetic instruments used to get God's people to stop, to reconsider their way of viewing reality, and change their behavior. The Good Samaritan is a perfect example of this. So we have this interaction between a lawyer and Jesus. We know from previous texts the 12 disciples are there. There's some other people there as well. And the lawyer asks, hey, like, what do I have to do to inherit eternal life? And Jesus asks him, well, what's in the text? And the lawyer recites the correct answer. You must love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your mind, and love your neighbors yourself. And Jesus is like, great, you got it. Nice job. But the lawyer's not happy. He's not satisfied. Wanting to vindicate himself, he asked Jesus, and who is my neighbor? And this isn't like a simple question. There's a lot of intention behind this question. And the intention is, well, Jesus, not everyone is my neighbor. Like, I can't love everyone. That's unreasonable. So if you could help me, like, create a boundary line between here's the people who are my neighbors, those ones aren't, that would be super helpful. And what does Jesus do? He launches into a story. And he tells a story about a guy who falls victim to robbers, and he's left half dead on the side of the road. And not one, but two religious Jewish leaders of the time pass him right on by. And the third person comes, and he's a Samaritan. And it's at this point we should know that the Jews and the Samaritans hate each other. They despise each other. And this goes back hundreds and hundreds of years prior, back to the Old Testament. So both of these people groups trace their roots back to the 12 tribes of Israel. And after King Solomon dies, these groups split. And the Samaritans go one way, and the Jews go another way. And ever since then, there's been some hatred and division. And so this day, when Jesus is walking around, like, those tensions are so high that the Jewish people don't even go through Samaria. They just avoid it altogether. And it's at this point, the Samaritan, well, he shows up and he is generous with his time, with his resources, with his money. He shows compassion, caring. Like, he takes care of this guy. He doesn't even know who this guy is, and he takes care of him. And it's here that Jesus turns that original question upside down. If you remember, the original question was, who is my neighbor? Like, Jesus, who's my neighbor? And Jesus flips it around and he says, well, who was a neighbor? Like, who showed up as a neighbor to this guy on the side of the road? And I think if I was here, I would imagine the lawyer kind of going like this. He's like, ugh. It's like Voldemort in Harry Potter. Like, he doesn't even want to say Samaritan. He's like, the one who shows mercy. And Jesus says, go and do likewise. Jesus' response isn't, all right, let me help you figure out who your neighbor is, but rather, who acted like the neighbor? Oh, it's that person that you hate, that people group you despise that showed up and acted morally and with good values, and they helped someone. Oh, and furthermore, it's your tribe, your people, who you assume to be good, moral, upstanding people. They didn't do anything. Like, they actually kind of went out of their way to do nothing. And so it's here we start to see, like, how is Jesus shifting the framework of reality, not just for the man who asked this question, but for everyone present. I think we can start to think, like, this parable isn't a story then about moral attitudes. It's so much more. It's a subversive tool offering commentary on some really serious issues, tribalism and racism of the time. And in Jesus not answering that original question, he addresses some deeply held, like, unspoken assumptions and convictions, not just of the man, but of the culture worldwide at the time, or the known world at the time. I like to think, like, think about what we know now about direct communication, indirect communication, and kind of how we process those. What if Jesus had answered the original question in not an indirect manner, but a direct manner? And the lawyer goes, hey, who's my neighbor? And Jesus goes, well, it's everyone. Like, do you kind of see how that would be so easy to just dismiss? Or go, oh, it's loud in here, I didn't hear that correctly. Or else surely he couldn't mean everyone. Like, it would just be so easy to dismiss this idea. Whereas he told a story that kind of drew us in. And we had to really think about, like, oh, who is the good person in this story? Who should have shown up in a different way? It kind of draws us in and gives us some new insights. So that was question number one. Question number two is, what if parables are speaking the language and the imagery of the biblical story? Jesus loves to quote the Old Testament and prophets from the Old Testament a lot. And he sees himself as the climax of the Old Testament biblical story. So a lot of parables, especially parables like about judgment or warning, have a ton of what we call like hyperlinks back to the Old Testament. There's one found in the Good Samaritan, and it takes us back to the book of Leviticus. So in this book, just kind of a wide summary before we pop into one verse, God is talking to Moses and the Israelite people, and he's saying, like, hey, you're going to be my people on earth. You're going to be my representatives on earth, and you need to live differently. Like, you're going to show other people how to live, like, a godly life. And so you have to do things differently. And so in a long kind of speech, this is just one verse, God's saying, you shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against any of your people, but you shall love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord. And so in this context, we understand neighbor to mean fellow Israelite people. And now in this Good Samaritan story, we understand Jesus is expanding on this idea. And he's saying, no, it's not just about like the Israelite neighbors anymore. It's about everyone. Like I came for all people. So question number 3, our third and final question for this morning. What if parables aren't about us or our relationship with God? What if it's not about you? Has anyone ever looked at you and told you that? I've had that a few times, and it's kind of humbling, right? What if it's not about me? What if it's not about us? What if Jesus told parables not as moralistic tales about how to be a good person, but rather to introduce us to how he views himself and what he's doing in the world? What if parables are a way of announcing the arrival of God's kingdom on earth? And with the arrival of God's kingdom on earth, there comes a different way of doing things. There's a new value set. We value people differently. We do relationships, marriage and friendships differently. We think about our money differently and our time differently. Sometimes we call this the upside down kingdom because God calls us to live differently than what the world wants. I like this quote. It's a bit long. It's from Tim Mackey of the Bible Project. But he says what I'm trying to say, but he does it so well, I just decided to quote him. The difference is, instead of reading a parable and saying, how is this about me and my relationship to God, it's reversing it and saying, how's this about Jesus and the inauguration of God's kingdom on earth? And if I'm a part of God's kingdom too, because I'm joining the Jesus movement, like I'm opting in here, then this teaches me something about the new world and a new value set of God's kingdom that I'm a part of. And that's how it then starts to speak to me. That's how these parables and these stories start to speak to me. But it's not about me. It's about Jesus. So if we go back to our Good Samaritan story, think about if we had just thought about this story in terms of like you and what you're supposed to go do, or me and what I'm supposed to go do. We would miss out on this wider narrative of all these things we just talked about. And I'm sure there's even more that we didn't get to this morning. I was thinking about just the social commentary that Jesus was providing to the people at this time, and just how like provocative and intense it was. Jesus didn't tell parables to provide friendly little illustrations of abstract theology. He told parables because what he was doing was so different. It was so explosive and so dangerous that the only way he could talk about it was to use stories. I think, of course, we can honor this story in its original cultural context and understand kind of what Jesus was doing in that time and place. But I also think for us today, I wonder if we could use this story as a framework to have some conversations about our wider world, country, whatever. I'm not even going to pick an example. There's so many. Whatever social conversation you want to have, how might we use this framework to begin to have those conversations a little bit differently? And furthermore, just thinking, zooming in to you and me and to us here, who is the Samaritan in this story for you? Who might God, if Jesus is telling you this story today in Helena, Montana, 2025, and he is telling this to you, who might he put into that role, the third person walking along the road? Or what person might represent a certain people group for you? And two, furthermore, I wonder too who he might put into the priest and the Levite spot. And you can get really specific and maybe just think about this question over lunch or dinner conversation or as you go about your week, who might God put into that Samaritan role? How might God be using this parable to shift your framework of reality today? Because if we're called to live differently, I think we're also called to think about these things differently and have conversations differently from what the world wants. It's not internet comments vomiting over each other. It's thoughtful discussion. So as we kind of move towards communion this morning and just a place to reflect and meditate and think about all of these things, I just want to leave you with one final question. What if parables are not simply neat and clever ways that Jesus taught moral and ethical truths? What if they're stories that serve as expressions or announcements of the arrival of God's kingdom here on earth? And we get to choose to opt into that kingdom. And we get to choose, like we have the honor of being expressions of Jesus right where we're at and reflecting him right back into the world around us, wherever we end up in our days and weeks. So we're going to give you a chance to take communion. And if you've not taken communion with us before and you're wondering if you're welcome, yes, if you belong to Jesus, you're more than welcome. That being said, if you're not feeling it or you don't want to, there's no pressure at all. We have bread over here. There's a gluten-free option. You just have to prompt that. There's wine and juice over here. Prompt the juice if you need that. They'll just default to wine. We'll go out row by row and then hang on to it, and we'll get up and we'll take communion together. I love communion because it's just this ancient tradition that reminds us of Jesus' death and like victory over death on the cross. And this is just one way we get to like remember our baptism and just our part of like God's greater story. So I'm going to pray. We'll give the ushers a chance and the band a chance to kind of get set, and we'll lead you through communion. God, we just thank you. Thank you for this story. We thank you for the challenge, the opportunity to get to just lead full lives of who you want us to be right where we're at. We ask that you send your Spirit into us, into the bread and the wine, and as we go from here, we might just get to be little expressions of you. How can we begin to think about things differently? How might you ask us to shift our framework? We love you. Amen.
If you'd like to learn more about Narrate Church, find us online at narratechurch.org.
You can also look us up on Facebook or Instagram. Thanks for listening.